My own mother nearly unalived my autistic son with her holistic treatments. I had her arrested and never looked back. Years later, she still thinks she was right, and now she wants to explain herself. When my son was just 5 years old, he started deteriorating right in front of my face. And because he was diagnosed with autism, none of the doctors took him seriously. They all tried to convince me it was just another autism symptom. Like, what the F? Since when are stomach pain and fatigue symptoms of autism? The only one that supported me during this was my mother. Well, kinda. She was convinced that autism was a curable disease and something that could be eliminated with a good mindset. But still, when I told her about Charlie's symptoms, she seemed extremely worried. She started offering to babysit him more often and gave him holistic healing rituals, Turkish herbal tea, Kundalini yoga, body scan meditations. I never believed they would actually work, but they weren't harmful, so I let her do it anyway. Until one day he came home looking much, much worse than when I had first seen him that morning, and in his hand was this water bottle filled with what looked like black liquid. "Charlie, can you show me?" "No!" he yelled at the top of his lungs before running into his bedroom and slamming the door shut. You see, children with autism are very sensitive to unexpected demands, so their reaction is usually to shut down and enter into avoidance. Okay, no big deal, I thought to myself. I simply made a call to my mother to ask what was in the water bottle. Ha 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 ha, she laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. I was baking Halloween cupcakes and Charlie insisted on stealing the black food coloring. He didn't stop until I let him put a few drops into his water. Looking back, I should have known no one laughs that hard at food coloring, but this was my mother, the person I trusted more than anything in the world, so I took her word for it and actually found it somewhat endearing too. Over the next few days, I watched as Charlie's unexplained symptoms grew worse and worse. I would stay up all night trying to research what was going on. I started putting him on a 12-ingredient diet and upped our monthly grocery budget by $500 to make sure everything he was eating was completely healthy and wholesome. And after having a nightmare about Charlie passing away in his sleep, I started sleeping on a mattress on the floor of his bedroom every single night. And the entire time, my mother was aware of all this. In fact, she helped me pick out what to buy and even pitched in like 10% or something, enough to make me feel like she was supporting me. But every day, Charlie looked more and more like a cancer patient. I couldn't brush his hair without clumps of hair coming out. His skin became so pale he looked like Edward Scissorhands. And the meal that was once his favorite, homemade chicken nuggets and pasta, he couldn't even eat more than one bite. In just a week, he had lost 15 pounds. And one night, it happened. He was in the middle of sipping on his water bottle when he went completely limp and collapsed back onto his bed. Luckily, I'm a pretty light sleeper, so I woke up straight away and dialed 911. His pulse was so weak that I could barely even feel it. His hands were ice cold and twitching. I kept him clutched in my arms, promising over and over that I'd never let him go. While Charlie was in the ICU, the first person to interview me was a social worker. She asked me things like, "Can you explain why you didn't take him to the doctor sooner?" Or, "Have you been covering for someone who's hurting your son?" Every word out of her mouth hit a nerve, because it just reminded me of the countless times I tried to look for help and got turned down. Luckily, a nurse noticed her BS and came over to ask me questions that were actually concerned with Charlie's health. I showed her all the photos I had taken of the ingredients I cook his food with, the symptoms tracker I kept on my phone, the brand of air purifier I use. Her eyebrows were furrowed so hard I thought they were about to fall off, because all of this just confused her even more. To lighten the mood, I joked about the black water obsession he had and how I wished he was as obsessed with that as he was with eating full meals. But instead of laughing, her face turned super serious. "Can you show me what you're talking about?" I always carried it around with me because it was Charlie's comfort item. She took the bottle away, and when she returned, there were tears in her eyes. "There's no black food coloring in it," she whispered. "It's activated charcoal, not the small amounts you find in toothpaste. This is an extremely dangerous amount." After talking more with the nurses and doing some digging, I found out that it was causing iron deficiency, calcium deficiency, magnesium deficiency, vitamin B12 deficiency, and zinc deficiency. In short, my son was chronically malnourished. I instantly called my mother and asked her what the F she was thinking. "You should be thanking me," was the first thing she said. "Everyone in my holistic support Facebook group swears by activated charcoal. It heals autism, and what Charlie is going through right now are just autism withdrawal symptoms. You're effing welcome." I hung up and vomited in the nearest trash can. My own mother had been poisoning my son, and she thought she was helping him. That was yesterday. Charlie's still in the ICU. The doctors have him on IV nutrients and fluids, trying to reverse the damage. They don't know if there will be long-term effects. They don't even know if he'll fully recover. All because my mother decided she knew better than medical science. I haven't slept. I can't eat. All I can do is sit here and watch the machines keeping my son alive, wondering how I missed this, how I let this happen right under my nose. I've been sitting in this hospital chair for so long, my back feels permanently bent. The nurses keep bringing me coffee I don't drink and sandwiches I can't stomach. Every time a doctor walks by, I practically jump out of my skin. The waiting is the worst part. Well, that and the guilt. The crushing, suffocating guilt that I let this happen to my own kid. It's been 48 hours since Charlie was admitted. The doctors have him stabilized, but just barely. Dr. Patel, the pediatric specialist assigned to Charlie's case, just finished explaining his condition to me. Her dark eyes were compassionate but serious as she detailed his symptoms. His nutrient levels are dangerously low, especially B12 and magnesium. If his body doesn't start responding to the treatment within the next day, he might fall into a coma, a freak freaking coma. My 5-year-old son. We're doing everything we can, Dr. Patel told me, her hand resting briefly on my shoulder. But you need to prepare yourself. The recovery process won't be quick. I haven't left Charlie's side except to use the bathroom. I've been sleeping in short bursts, jerking awake every time a machine beeps or a nurse comes in to check his vitals. They offered me a cot, but I can't bring myself to lie down. Not while Charlie is hooked up to all these tubes and wires, his small chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The fluorescent lights cast a sickly glow over his pale skin, making the freckles across his nose stand out in stark relief. My phone keeps buzzing with messages from my mother. I finally turned it off after the 20th text, asking when she could visit her special boy. The audacity of this woman is unbelievable. She poisoned my son and still thinks she deserves to see him. I've instructed the hospital staff not to let her anywhere near Charlie's room. They've been great about it, adding a note to his file and alerting security. The head nurse, a woman with steel gray hair and kind eyes, assured me they take these situations very seriously. Around 3 a.m., Charlie's condition took a turn. His oxygen levels dropped suddenly, and a team of nurses rushed in. I got pushed to the corner of the room, watching helplessly as they adjusted machines and injected something into his IV. The beeping of the monitors grew more urgent, matching the frantic pace of my heartbeat. One of the nurses, a guy named Trevor with kind eyes and a calm voice, explained they were giving him additional supplements to try to boost his system. His body is fighting, Trevor told me. That's a good sign. But by morning, Charlie wasn't looking any better. His skin had this grayish tint that made my stomach twist into knots. The circles under his eyes looked like bruises against his ashen complexion. His lips were cracked and pale despite the petroleum jelly the nurses kept applying. I sat by his bed, holding his tiny hand in mine, telling him stories about dinosaurs even though I wasn't sure he could hear me. I described the Triceratops figurine waiting for him at home, how we'd build a new diorama for his collection when he got better. Dr. Patel came in around 8 a.m. with another doctor, an older man she introduced as Dr. Levine, a neurologist with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. They checked Charlie's reflexes and pupil response, talking in low voices that made my anxiety spike. I watched their faces carefully, trying to interpret every frown, every subtle exchange of glances. We're concerned about potential neurological impacts, Dr. Levine finally said to me. The severe nutrient deficiencies can affect brain function, especially in developing children. I felt like I was going to pass out. The room seemed to tilt sideways for a moment as his words sank in. What does that mean? Will he have brain damage? It's too early to tell, he replied, his face serious but kind. We're going to run some additional tests today. The tests took hours. MRIs, blood work, spinal taps, procedures no 5-year-old should have to endure. I signed consent form after consent form, my signature becoming more ragged with each one. The waiting room became my temporary home, the vinyl chairs leaving imprints on my legs as I shifted positions, trying to find comfort where there was none. When they wheeled Charlie back to his room, he looked even smaller than before, swallowed up by the hospital bed, his dinosaur pajamas replaced by a sterile hospital gown that hung off his thin frame. At 4:42 the next morning, it happened. I was dozing in the chair next to Charlie's bed when something woke me. At first, I couldn't figure out what had changed. The room was still bathed in the dim glow of monitoring equipment, the steady hum of machines creating a background symphony I'd grown accustomed to. Then I realized the rhythm of the machines was different. Charlie was completely still. No twitching, no subtle movements under his eyelids, just stillness. Then the alarm started blaring. Doctors and nurses flooded the room within seconds. Someone pulled me away as they surrounded Charlie's bed. I heard fragments of medical jargon being shouted across the room. Bradycardia, pupils fixed, non-responsive. A nurse named Melissa, the same one who had discovered the charcoal, guided me to the waiting area. Her grip on my arm was the only thing keeping me upright. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before us, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like angry insects. What's happening? I demanded, my voice breaking. Is he dying? He slipped into a coma, she explained gently. The doctors are working to stabilize him. A coma. The word hit me like a physical blow. I collapsed into a chair, my legs unable to support me anymore. Melissa sat with me, not offering empty reassurances, just being present. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. She handed me a tissue box and a cup of water that I clutched but didn't drink. After what felt like years, Dr. Patel came to find me. Charlie was stable again, but unresponsive. They'd moved him to the pediatric intensive care unit where they could monitor him more closely. Her scrubs looked rumpled, and there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. If he wakes up, Dr. Patel said, choosing her words carefully, there may be cognitive damage. The extent won't be clear until if he regains consciousness. If, not when. If. I broke down completely then, sobbing in the middle of the waiting room, not caring who saw me. All the fear and anger and guilt I'd been holding back came pouring out. Melissa brought me tissues and water, sitting silently beside me until I could breathe normally again. An elderly couple across the room watched with sympathetic eyes, the woman clutching her husband's hand as if my pain was contagious. When I finally calmed down enough to form coherent thoughts, one thing became crystal clear. My mother was still out there, probably telling her Facebook group about how Charlie was detoxing from autism. The thought made me physically ill, but it also ignited something in me, a cold, hard determination I didn't know I possessed. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and stared at my reflection. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me, hollow-eyed, pale, with unwashed hair and dark circles that rivaled Charlie's. But behind the exhaustion, I saw something else. Resolve. I asked asked Melissa if I could leave for a few hours, promising to be back before noon. She helped me set up alerts on my phone that would notify me immediately if there was any change in Charlie's condition. Then I walked out of the hospital into the bright morning sunlight that felt obscenely cheerful given the circumstances. I drove straight to my mother's house, not to confront her. I wasn't ready for that yet, but to gather evidence. I still had a key from when I used to check on her place while she was on her spiritual retreats to Sedona. I knew she volunteered at the community garden on Thursday mornings, so the house would be empty. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Once inside, I went straight to the kitchen. My mother's healing center, she called it. The counters were cluttered with bottles, jars, and bags of herbs and powders. The air smelled of dried herbs and something vaguely medicinal. I started taking photos of everything, making sure the labels were clearly visible. One entire cabinet was dedicated to supplements, most with labels in languages I couldn't read. Some had warning symbols that had been partially scratched off. In a drawer next to the stove, I found a notebook. My mother's handwriting filled the pages. Recipes for tinctures and tonics, notes about their supposed effects, dosage recommendations. I flipped through it, my horror growing with each page. One entry caught my eye. Charlie's cleanse. High dose every other day for full withdrawal. Signs of detox, fatigue, pallor, decreased appetite, normal, continue treatment. She had been systematically poisoning my son and documenting it like some sick science experiment. I took photos of every page, my hands trembling with rage. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A school pickup authorization form with my signature on it. Except I had never signed it. My mother had forged my signature to get permission to pick Charlie up from school during lunch breaks. The form allowed her to take him off campus for what she claimed were special therapy appointments I had approved. This explained why she'd been able to administer extra doses during the day without my knowledge. She was literally taking him from school, giving him the charcoal mixture, and returning him before I'd ever know. I gathered as much evidence as I could, taking photos, videos, even bagging up samples of some of the powders and liquids. I found a large container of activated charcoal hidden behind the rice in her pantry. The label had been removed, replaced with handwritten tape that said cleansing agent. Next to it was a bottle of something labeled mineral solution, with a skull and crossbones symbol that had been covered with a smiley face sticker. As I was about to leave, I noticed a stack of printed Facebook posts on her desk. They were from a private group called Autism Recovery Warriors. I quickly photographed them too. The posts were horrifying. Parents sharing protocols for curing autism, celebrating symptoms of malnutrition as signs of healing, encouraging each other to ignore doctors' warnings. One post featured before and after photos of a child who looked alarmingly similar to Charlie, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes in the after photo that was labeled healing in progress. I left everything exactly as I found it and drove straight back to the hospital. On the way, I called Logan, an old friend from college who had become an attorney. I gave him a brief rundown of the situation and asked if he could meet me the next day. He agreed without hesitation, his voice growing increasingly concerned as I explained what I'd found. Charlie's condition hadn't changed when I returned. The nurses had washed his hair and changed his gown, making him look slightly less fragile. The soft curls I loved to ruffle were clean now, framing his face like a halo. I sat beside him, holding his hand and telling him about the dinosaur documentary we would watch together when he woke up, not if, when. The next few days passed in a blur of medical updates, brief naps in uncomfortable chairs, and meetings with Logan. He was horrified by the evidence I'd gathered and agreed to help me pursue charges against my mother. It wouldn't be easy, he warned. We'd need to prove intent, not just recklessness. But the forged school pickup form was damning, as were her detailed notes. This isn't someone making a misguided mistake, Logan said, reviewing the photos of my mother's notebook. This is calculated. 4 days after Charlie fell into a coma, I got a call from a woman named Tara, who identified herself as a CPS investigator. My heart sank. Not this again. We've received another report regarding your son, she said, her voice neutral. The allegation suggests you may have caused his current condition through food neglect. I almost laughed. Of course my mother would try to deflect blame onto me. It was so predictable I should have seen it coming. I'd like to meet with you, Tara continued. Today, if possible. I agreed to meet her at the hospital. Before she arrived, I organized all my evidence into a binder. The symptom tracker I'd kept, receipts from my grocery shopping showing the healthy foods I'd been buying, photos of the meals I'd prepared for Charlie, and most importantly, everything I'd gathered from my mother's house. Tara turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately respected. Her blazer was slightly wrinkled, and she carried a worn leather portfolio that suggested years in the field. She started by asking me standard questions about Charlie's care, which I answered calmly and thoroughly. Then I handed her the binder. Before we go any further, I said, I need you to look at this, and I need you to check the surveillance footage at Brookview Elementary's South Gate from 2 weeks ago, during lunch hour. She raised an eyebrow but took the binder. As she flipped through it, her expression shifted from professional detachment to concern, and then to something like anger. When she got to the photos of my mother's notebook, she closed the binder and looked at me directly. I'll need copies of all of this, she said, and I'll check that footage immediately. The next day, Tara called me. She sounded different, apologetic even. The footage had clearly shown my mother passing Charlie a bottle through the fence during lunch recess. The substitute monitor on duty that day admitted she had allowed it as a favor to my mother, who had claimed it contained a special vitamin drink I had approved. We're dropping the investigation against you, Tara said, and opening one into your mother instead. 2 weeks later, the police brought my my mother in for questioning. She didn't deny giving Charlie the bottle. She couldn't, with the video evidence, but she claimed it was just water with plant minerals that was good for him. The police tested samples of her tonics and found them to contain dangerous levels of activated charcoal, along with a compound containing heavy metals that wasn't approved for human consumption. The investigation deepened. Forensic examination of my mother's computer revealed large Amazon orders of non-FDA regulated supplements from overseas suppliers. One of the tinctures she'd been giving Charlie had been banned in Canada and the UK after being linked to organ damage in children. When investigators compared the dates in her notebook to Charlie's medical timeline, they matched almost perfectly. She had been increasing the doses as his symptoms worsened. Meanwhile, Charlie remained in a coma. The doctors had managed to stabilize his nutrient levels, but his body had been through too much trauma. Dr. Patel was cautiously optimistic that he would eventually wake up, but couldn't predict when or what condition he'd be in when he did. I spent every day at his bedside, talking to him, reading his favorite dinosaur books, playing the music he loved. The nurses showed me how to help with his care, moisturizing his skin, exercising his limbs to prevent muscle atrophy, even helping with the sponge baths. It gave me something to do, some way to feel useful instead of helpless. One morning, about 3 weeks after Charlie was admitted, I was gently brushing his hair when I felt a slight movement. His fingers twitched against the sheet. I froze, afraid to hope. Then his eyelids fluttered. "Charlie?" I whispered, pressing the call button for the nurse. "Baby, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually settling on my face. He didn't speak, but he squeezed my hand weakly. The nurses rushed in, followed quickly by Dr. Patel. They ran tests, checked his responses, asked him simple questions that he answered with slight nods or shakes of his head. "This is very encouraging," Dr. Patel told me afterward, "but we need to be realistic about his recovery. It will be slow, and we won't know the full extent of any cognitive impacts for some time." I didn't care. My son was awake. He recognized me. That was enough for now. The next few days were filled with more tests, visits from specialists, and small but significant improvements. Charlie started speaking again, just single words at first, then short phrases. His fine motor skills were affected. He struggled to hold a spoon or crayon, but the therapists were optimistic about his progress. A week after Charlie woke up, Logan came to the hospital with news. The district attorney had agreed to pursue criminal charges against my mother for child endangerment, medical abuse, and several other offenses. The evidence was overwhelming, especially after they found videos on her phone of Charlie having what appeared to be seizure-like reactions to her treatments, videos she had shared with her Facebook group as evidence of the autism leaving his body. "They're offering her a plea deal," Logan explained, "but she's refusing it. She still believes she did nothing wrong." That didn't surprise me. My mother had always been stubborn, convinced of her own righteousness. What did surprise me was how little I felt toward her now. The white-hot rage had cooled into something harder and more resolved. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice for Charlie and protection for other children whose parents might be influenced by the same dangerous misinformation. Charlie continued to improve slowly. After another week, he was moved out of the ICU to a regular pediatric room. His speech was getting better, though he still struggled with certain words. Physical therapy was helping with his motor skills. The neuropsychologist said there might be some lasting cognitive effects, but children's brains are remarkably adaptable. One afternoon, as I was helping Charlie with his lunch, cut into tiny pieces he could manage with his still shaky hands, he looked up at me with those serious eyes of his. "Mom," he said carefully, forming the word with deliberate effort. "No more black water." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "No more black water," I promised. "Never again." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his lunch. That evening, Dr. Patel told me they were considering releasing Charlie in another week or two, depending on his progress. He would need ongoing therapy and regular checkups, but he was stable enough to continue his recovery at home. "You should be very proud of him," she said, "and of yourself. Many parents wouldn't have fought so hard to find answers." I didn't feel proud. I felt like I had failed him by trusting my mother, by not questioning the black water sooner, by not connecting the dots faster, but I kept those thoughts to myself. The day before Charlie was scheduled to be discharged, I received a call from the district attorney handling my mother's case. They had reached a plea agreement. My mother would serve time for what she had done to Charlie, and the terms included no contact with either of us upon her release. She finally realized the evidence against her was too strong, the DA explained, especially after the experts reviewed her Facebook group activities. She was advising other parents to use the same protocol on their children. I felt a chill run through me. How many other children might have been harmed by her advice? I asked the DA if those parents would be notified. "We're working with the social media platform to identify and contact them," she assured me. "Your documentation has been invaluable for that process." When I hung up, I sat in the hospital corridor for a long time, processing everything. My mother would face consequences for her actions. Charlie was recovering. We had a long road ahead, but we would walk it together. And maybe, just maybe, other children would be spared because of what we had been through. The next day, Charlie came home. The house felt different. I had cleaned it obsessively, removing any trace of the treatments my mother had brought in. I'd set up Charlie's room with all his favorite things, his dinosaur collection arranged on shelves, his weighted blanket on the bed, Spiky waiting on his pillow. As I helped Charlie settle in, he looked around with a small smile. "Home," he said simply. "Yes, buddy," I replied, kissing the top of his head. "We're home." The next few months were a blur of doctor appointments, therapy sessions, and small victories. Charlie had to relearn so many things: how to hold a crayon without his hands shaking, how to climb the stairs without getting winded, how to trust food again. The neurologist said he might always have some issues with fine motor skills, but kids are resilient. I watched my son fight his way back day by day, and it was both heartbreaking and amazing. We developed this whole new routine. Mornings started with his medications and a special nutrient shake that didn't taste great, but Charlie drank it anyway. He called it his superhero juice, after I told him it would help make his body strong again. Then we'd do his physical therapy exercises together. I learned all of them from his therapist, so we could practice at home. Afternoons were for rest and quiet play. Charlie's energy levels were still nowhere near what they used to be. The court case against my mother moved forward, but I tried to keep Charlie sheltered from all that. He didn't need to know the details. When he asked about Grandma, I just told him she was away for a while. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that his grandmother poisoned him because she thought she was curing his autism? You don't. Maybe someday when he's older, but not now. About 3 months after Charlie came home, I got a call from Tara at CPS. She wanted to check in, see how we were doing. I invited her over for coffee, partly because I wanted her to see how much better Charlie was doing, and partly because I'd grown to respect her. She was one of the few people who believed me from the start. When Tara arrived, Charlie was sitting at the kitchen table, carefully coloring a dinosaur picture. His movements were still a bit jerky, but he was staying inside the lines most of the time. He looked up when she came in, gave a shy wave, then went back to his coloring. Such a normal kid thing to do. I almost cried. He looks good, Tara said, accepting the coffee I offered. Really good. I nodded, keeping my voice low. The doctors are amazed by his progress. His nutrient levels are almost normal now. He's gained back most of the weight he lost. We sat at the table with Charlie, who occasionally showed us his coloring progress. Tara asked him questions about his dinosaurs, and he answered with growing enthusiasm. His speech was still a bit halting, but the improvement was obvious. After Charlie went to his room for quiet time, Tara's expression turned serious. I wanted to let you know that we've identified 12 other children from your mother's Facebook group who were being given similar treatments. Some of them are in pretty bad shape. My stomach dropped. Are they going to be okay? Most of them, yes. We got to them in time thanks to your documentation. 2 are hospitalized but stable. She hesitated. There's something else. Your mother's case has attracted some attention. A reporter from the local paper wants to talk to you. I immediately shook my head. No way. Charlie's been through enough. I understand completely, Tara said. But this reporter, Hannah Chen, she specializes in medical misinformation. She wants to write about how these online groups target parents of children with special needs. It could help other families avoid what you went through. I still wasn't convinced. I'll think about it. After Tara left, I checked on Charlie. He was napping with Spiky clutched to his chest, his breathing deep and even. I sat on the edge of his bed, just watching him sleep. The thought of other kids going through what he did made me sick. Maybe talking to that reporter wasn't such a bad idea after all. I called Hannah Chen the next day. She was respectful and didn't push when I said I wouldn't discuss certain details or allow Charlie to be interviewed or photographed. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop while Charlie was at his occupational therapy session. Hannah was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with a no-nonsense attitude I appreciated. She took notes as I explained how my mother had gradually poisoned Charlie under the guise of helping him, how doctors had dismissed my concerns because of his autism diagnosis, and how close I came to losing him. This is happening all over the country, Hannah told me. Parents desperate for help all prey to these groups promising cures for conditions that can't be cured. Autism, ADHD, even epilepsy. The treatments range from useless to downright dangerous. Like activated charcoal, I said. She nodded. Exactly. It's particularly insidious because it's something you can buy at any health food store. Perfectly legal, even beneficial in certain specific medical contexts. But giving it to a child regularly, it's basically slow poisoning. The article came out 2 weeks later. Hannah kept her promise. No photos of Charlie, no identifying details beyond our first names, and the fact that we lived in the Pacific Northwest. She focused instead on the dangers of medical misinformation and the vulnerability of special needs families. She included quotes from doctors explaining why activated charcoal was dangerous for regular consumption, especially for children. The response was overwhelming. My email inbox filled with messages from other parents sharing similar stories. Some had narrowly avoided being pulled into the same groups my mother frequented. Others hadn't been so lucky. A few thanked me for speaking out, saying the article had made them question treatments they were considering for their own children. One email in particular caught my attention. It was from a woman named Breyer who had a daughter with autism. She'd been part of my mother's Facebook group until she read Hannah's article. I recognized your mother's username immediately, she wrote. She was one of the most respected voices in the group. I almost started her protocol with my daughter. Your story saved us. I cried when I read that. The thought that something good could come from our nightmare meant everything to me. 6 months after Charlie came home from the hospital, we had our day in court. My mother had finally agreed to plead guilty to child endangerment and medical abuse. I decided to attend the sentencing hearing alone. Charlie stayed with Ms. Jenkins, his kindergarten teacher who had become a close friend through all of this. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. My mother sat at the defendant's table, her back straight, her hair neatly styled as always. She looked exactly the same as she had before all this happened, which was somehow shocking to me. Shouldn't there be some outward sign of the harm she'd caused? When they brought her in, she tried to catch my eye. I looked away. I couldn't bear to see if there was remorse in her face, or worse, if there wasn't. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewed the case details. She spoke spoke directly to my mother when delivering the sentence: 8 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 6, plus a restraining order preventing her from contacting Charlie or me ever again. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding, the judge said firmly. This was a calculated campaign that nearly cost a child his life. The court cannot ignore the premeditation involved. My mother didn't react visibly to the sentence. As they led her away, she finally caught my eye. There was no remorse there, only a kind of righteous indignation that made my blood run cold. She still believed she was right. I left the courthouse feeling hollow. There was no satisfaction in seeing my mother sentenced, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. I drove to Ms. Jenkins' house to pick up Charlie, trying to compose myself before seeing him. He was playing in her backyard when I arrived, carefully stacking blocks with another child from his class. His movements were still a bit clumsy, but he was laughing. The sound of it hit me like a physical force. My son was laughing. He was alive and healing and happy in this moment. "Mommy!" he called when he saw me, running over with his slightly unsteady gait. "Look what we built!" I knelt down to admire the block tower, pulling him into a hug that he returned with his whole body. Over his shoulder, Ms. Jenkins gave me a questioning look. I nodded slightly to let her know it was done. She squeezed my shoulder as we left, whispering, "You did the right thing." Life gradually settled into a new normal. Charlie returned to kindergarten part-time, with special accommodations for his ongoing recovery. His therapists were amazed by his progress, though they warned me he might always have some lingering effects from the poisoning. His fine motor skills might never be quite what they would have been. He might struggle with fatigue more than other kids his age, but he was alive, and he was thriving in his own way. The article Hannah wrote led to more media attention on the dangers of medical misinformation. She contacted me again, asking if I'd be willing to help with a follow-up piece focused on how to spot red flags in alternative treatments. This time, I agreed without hesitation. If our experience could prevent even one family from going through what we did, it would be worth it. About a year after Charlie came home from the hospital, I received a letter from prison. My mother's handwriting on the envelope made my hands shake. I almost threw it away unopened, but something made me read it. It wasn't an apology. It was 8 pages of justification, explaining how she still believed the activated charcoal was helping Charlie, how the doctors were part of a conspiracy to suppress natural cures, how I had betrayed her by going to the authorities. She ended by saying she forgave me and hoped someday I would see the truth. I burned the letter in the backyard fire pit that night after Charlie went to bed. As I watched the pages curl and blacken, I made a decision. I would start a foundation, something small at first, focused on educating parents about the dangers of unregulated supplements and alternative treatments for developmental conditions. I would call it Charlie's Voice, because that's what this was really about, making sure kids like Charlie had advocates who listened to them, not people who tried to fix them. 3 years later, Charlie's Voice had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as a simple website with resources for parents had expanded into a small nonprofit with a part-time staff. We offered webinars for families, worked with pediatricians to develop screening questions for potential medical abuse, and provided support for parents navigating their children's diagnoses. Charlie himself was thriving in 3rd grade. He still had some coordination issues and tired more easily than his classmates, but he was reading above grade level and had developed an intense interest in paleontology. His dinosaur collection had taken over an entire bookshelf in his room. His autism was still very much a part of who he was. We had found therapies that helped him navigate the world more comfortably, but I had long since abandoned any notion of trying to cure him. I was speaking at a parent education event when a woman approached me afterward. She had dark circles under her eyes, and that haunted look I recognized all too well, the look of a parent fighting for their child against a system that wasn't listening. "I just wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "I was giving my son these supplements my sister recommended for his ADHD. Then I read about your son. I stopped immediately and took him to a new doctor. His liver enzymes were already elevated. If I'd continued..." She trailed off, blinking back tears. "Is he okay now?" I asked. She nodded, pulling out her phone to show me a photo of a smiling boy with a gap-toothed grin. "He's doing great. The proper medications and therapy are helping so much more than those supplements ever did. You saved him. You saved us." I thanked her, feeling that familiar mix of sadness and gratitude that always came with these interactions. As she walked away, I glanced at my watch. Time to pick up Charlie from his after-school science club. As I drove to the school, I thought about how far we'd come. The road hadn't been easy. Charlie still had nightmares sometimes. He still got anxious around certain foods and drinks. I still had moments of crushing guilt when I watched him struggle with tasks that should have been easy for him. But we were okay. More than okay, really. We were living proof that you could survive the unthinkable and find purpose in the aftermath. Charlie was waiting at the pickup area, chatting animatedly with his friend Kyle about something involving dinosaurs, judging by the excited hand gestures. When he saw me, he waved goodbye to Kyle and bounded over to the car with his slightly awkward run. "Mom, guess what? Mrs. Rodriguez said my dinosaur project was the best in the class," he announced as he climbed into the back seat. "That's awesome, buddy. I can't wait to see it," I replied, watching him in the rearview mirror as he buckled his seatbelt. His hands still fumbled a bit with the class, but he managed it on his own, something that would have been impossible a year ago. As we drove home, Charlie chattering about Triceratops facts in the back seat, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had survived. We were healing. And maybe, just maybe, our story was helping other families avoid the same nightmare. That was enough.